He had no face. He looked like he'd been put together using spare parts from different people. That was how Detective Stanhall felt when he saw the man who would become known as Gary Allen. At that point, Gary was just a small boy. Something about his appearance made that detective feel uneasy, yet he didn't know why. Fast forward a few decades, and that same detective would come face to face with Gary again. But this time Gary was a grown man, and it seemed he had become even more disturbing than before. So what had happened to him? And what did the detective know about his past? Here is the story of Gary Allen. Her name was Tracy Coons. She lived in a home on Shirley Drive in Las Vegas with her boyfriend, John Robinson, and 3 of her children, as well as the daughter of John from a previous relationship. It was going to be another regular day until a truck pulled up outside their house. When Tracy opened the door to investigate, she had no idea that everything was about to change forever. As Tracy peeked through the peephole, she could see a man and a woman standing on her doorstep. She didn't know them. She could see that they were both white and that the man was tall, but she couldn't make out any other details because of the darkness outside. Although Tracy was confused by their presence, she decided to open the door anyway. But when she did, 2 armed men suddenly burst inside the house and ordered everyone to lie on the floor. One of those men was Gary Allen. Tracy and her family were terrified. They were tied up while the intruders ransacked the house. However, despite taking plenty of valuables, including Tracy's 1998 Chrysler Concorde, the criminals didn't seem satisfied. They also took Tracy's 4 children away with them. Why did they do this? What had possessed them to take these kids away from their parents? For some bizarre reason, they intended to hold the children for ransom. This meant that Tracy and her boyfriend were allowed to stay in the house while the others went away. But it also meant that they had to pretend to cooperate with the police so that they could try and get the kids back. This made things difficult for them because neither Tracy nor her boyfriend had any money, so they couldn't pay the kidnappers. The only thing that Tracy and her partner could think to do was report the kidnapping to the police. But this wasn't a normal case. As the hours turned into days, the police were unable to find the kids or their abductors. Even worse, the people who kidnapped the children started making demands of Tracy and her partner. They wanted $2 million for the safe return of each child. Despite not having that kind of money, Tracy was adamant that she would do anything to get her kids back. But she knew that she needed help if she was going to pull it off. So she called all of her family members and friends. She told them that she could really use some financial help. Meanwhile, the kidnappers kept calling Tracy, but she never agreed to meet up with them. She didn't want to risk her own safety. After 8 long days of uncertainty, the police got a call from someone who informed them that the kids were at an abandoned house on North Mojave Road. A SWAT team rushed to the location and found the 4 children alive and unharmed. They were taken away immediately and reunited with their overjoyed parents. While the police searched the house for clues, they had no idea that one of those kids would play a pivotal role in catching the kidnapper, Gary Allen. After discovering the house empty, the police launched a massive manhunt for Gary and the others. They combed through local hospitals looking for anyone with gunshot wounds, because that's what they assumed the kidnappers might have suffered during the raid. But they came up empty-handed. That is until they got a tip-off from one of Tracy's friends. The friend told them that one of the victim's sons said he had seen Gary at a local hospital. His name was Sammy, and when the police interviewed him, he told them what he remembered seeing. Unfortunately, Gary had already left the hospital by the time they arrived, but the police did notice that he had checked himself in under a false name. So they were able to trace him to a hotel room where he was staying on the Strip. When the officers entered the room, Gary was nowhere to be seen, but they did find a big red stain on the bedsheets. Gary had cut himself shaving, and he had apparently been in a rush to leave. The police followed a trail of blood leading away from the hotel room and eventually tracked Gary down to a taxi. He had tried to travel to California. After the police interviewed the driver, they learned that Gary had gotten into a fight with some bikers and had sustained injuries to his head. At that point, they didn't know exactly what to make of the information. Did Gary attack the children alone? Or was he working with accomplices? Whatever the case may be, the police weren't sure if he was hurt or not. If he was, then they had a chance to catch him. But if he was still on the run, then he could have easily slipped over the border into Mexico. The next day, the police received a call from a man named David Titus. He told them that Gary had been in his apartment building and that he had a large lump on his head. David agreed to let the police search Gary's room, but they didn't find him there either. All they found was a gun. Was it used in the crime? They couldn't say for sure. But after running the weapon through their system, they discovered that it was stolen. This meant that Gary was likely armed and dangerous. And as the weeks passed by without any new leads, the police feared that he might have gotten away with it. But Gary's past would come back to haunt him years later when detectives Stan Hall and Dave Scholes were reviewing cold cases. They stumbled upon the file of a carjacking that had taken place in 1988. The victim described the attacker as a tall white male with brown hair and a mustache. The attackers had taken the victim's car and had shot him in the face. But strangely enough, the attacker had a birthmark shaped like the letter M near his left eye. Gary Allen also had a birthmark shaped like the letter M near his left eye. Could this be the same man? It certainly seemed that way, but the police needed proof. They asked the victim from 1988 to look at a photo lineup. And although he couldn't be certain, he felt that the person in the picture looked similar to the attacker. However, it would be another 6 years before the police could confirm that they were right. That's because in 1994, a security guard was shot during a robbery and Gary Allen was arrested. His appearance matched the description given by the witness, and his birthmark was also in the right place. Finally, the police had the proof they needed. When they arrested Gary, they took him down to the station for questioning, but he denied any involvement in the crimes. In fact, he insisted that he was innocent and had no idea why they were arresting him. Gary claimed that he worked as a used car salesman, but when the police ran this lead, they discovered that it was fake. It became clear to them that Gary was a career criminal who had been evading them for years. They finally had the evidence they needed to link him to the 1988 carjacking, and they were confident that he was also responsible for the kidnapping of the 4 children. Gary was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. At that point, he had been arrested 14 times. His record was filled with convictions for burglary, armed robbery, and kidnapping, but they had nothing linking him directly to the crime scene. Because of this, his lawyers argued that he didn't get a fair trial and should be granted a new one. The judge heard the arguments, but he ultimately decided to uphold the conviction. However, there was a twist to the story. Even though Gary was convicted, the police never recovered the money that had been stolen from Tracy's house. They also never recovered the gun that he allegedly used in the commission of the crime. Because of this, the defense appealed the case. To their surprise, the appeal was accepted and Gary was granted a new trial. The prosecution didn't believe that they could win the case without the physical evidence, so they decided to accept the new trial. During the retrial, Gary's lawyers tried everything they could to prove that he was innocent. They brought witnesses to the stand who testified that Gary was miles away at the time of the kidnapping. It seemed like Gary might get off free again, but then the prosecutor dropped a bombshell. He pulled Sammy into the courtroom and asked him to testify about what he remembered seeing at the hospital. It was enough to convict Gary, but there was one more piece of evidence left. The prosecutor told the jury that Gary had confessed to the crime. This was all they needed to hear. Gary was found guilty and sentenced to 267 years in prison. That brings us to the present day. Gary is serving his sentence at the High Desert State Prison in California. He has spent 16 years behind bars and will never get out. But there's something strange about his story. After he was convicted, he recanted his confession, saying that he was coerced into making it. If that's true, then does that mean that he's innocent? And if he is innocent, then who committed the crimes? What do you think about the case of Gary Allen? Do you think he's guilty or innocent? Let me know your thoughts. And if you like this video, then check out these other ones. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like these. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.